Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Whitfield, but everyone calls me Bear. I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 16 years now, and I thought I knew every secret these hills could keep. I was wrong. Back in '78, I was 43 years old and raising my daughter Sarah all by myself. My wife died in a car wreck 3 years before, and I'll be honest with you, I was drinking too much. Not on the job, mind you. I never let that happen. But at night, after Sarah went to bed, I'd sit on the porch with a bottle of bourbon and try to forget how empty the house felt. The mountains were my real home, though. I knew every hollow, every cave, every ridge in 200 square miles of the Monongahela National Forest. In all my years as a ranger, I'd found 23 missing people. Some were lost hikers who got turned around. Some were kids who wandered off from campsites. A few were folks who didn't want to be found but needed help anyway. I never lost a search. Not once. People trusted me because I knew these woods like the back of my hand. When city folks got scared by strange sounds at night, I'd tell them it was just owls or maybe a black bear looking for food. When they asked about the old stories, the mountain monsters and ghost tales, I'd laugh and say those were just moonshine stories passed down by bored miners. I believed that right up until October of 1978. It was late fall, and the leaves were dying but still hanging on the trees like they couldn't let go. You know how it gets in the mountains that time of year. Everything feels like it's waiting for something bad to happen. The air gets thin and cold, and sound travels funny. Sometimes you hear things that aren't really there. But this was different. Even the animals knew something was wrong. I first noticed it on October 15th. I was doing my regular patrol up in Seneca Creek Hollow, way back in the old mining taws. Territory. That's rough country, all twisted up with rhododendron thickets so thick you can barely walk through them. The creek runs orange from all the acid mine water, and there are caves everywhere from the old limestone mining. The Cherokee used to bury their dead up there, back before the white folks came. Then in the 1920s, there was a mine disaster that killed 47 men. They say the company just sealed up the mine with the bodies still inside rather than dig them out. Never even marked where they were buried. As I was walking my usual path that day, I realized something was bothering me. It took me a while to figure out what it was. Then it hit me. Silence. Complete, total silence. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never heard anything like it. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I stopped walking and listened harder. Nothing. Not even the sound of my own footsteps seemed to echo right. That's when I saw the first sign that everything was about to change. There, pressed deep into a flat piece of limestone beside the old mining road, was a footprint. But it wasn't like any footprint I'd ever seen. It was huge, about 20 inches long and shaped like a human foot, but wrong somehow, too wide, and it had 6 toes. The crazy part was, this print was pressed 3 inches deep into solid rock. I've seen what bare paws can do to soft ground, but this was limestone that had been there for millions of years. Whatever made this print had to weigh more than a truck and have feet harder than steel. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edges of the print. The stone was smooth, like it had been heated up and pressed while soft. But limestone doesn't work that way. It would take thousands of degrees of heat to make rock flow like that. As I crouched there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, my radio crackled. Sarah's voice came through, scratchy and far away. "Dad? Dad, are you there? Something's wrong with our radio at home. It keeps making weird sounds." I grabbed my radio and keyed the mic. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me?" Nothing but static answered back. I tried again. "Sarah, this is Dad. Come in." Still nothing. Just that empty, hissing static that makes your skin crawl. I looked at my radio. The power light was on and the battery was full. But when I tried to reach the ranger station, All I got was that same dead static. It was like every radio signal for miles around had just disappeared. Standing up, I took one more look at that impossible footprint in the stone. 6 toes, 20 inches long, pressed into solid rock. I didn't know it then, but I was looking at my first real evidence that some old stories aren't stories at all. And somewhere up in those hills, something that had been sleeping for 20 years was starting to wake up. The call came in the next morning, crackling through the radio like it was fighting its way through static. A family camping in Seneca Creek Hollow hadn't checked in. The Hendersons from Ohio, Mom, Dad, and 2 kids, ages 8 and 12. I drove up the old mining road with that sick feeling you get when you know something's really wrong. The kind of feeling that starts in your stomach and crawls up your spine like a cold hand. Their campsite was easy to find. Too easy. The family was there all right. All 4 of them arranged in a perfect circle around their cold fire pit, sitting upright like they were still enjoying the evening. But they'd been dead for hours. What made my blood run cold wasn't just that they were dead. It was how they were positioned. Their bodies faced inward toward the fire, hands resting on their knees, backs straight, like someone had very carefully arranged them after they died. And their eyes were gone. Not torn out or clawed out like an animal would do. Cut out. The wounds were perfectly clean, sealed somehow like they'd been men, and heated shut. No blood on their faces at all. Just smooth, closed skin where their eyes should have been. I'd seen plenty of death in my time as a ranger. People who'd fallen off cliffs, gotten mauled by bears, drowned in the creek during flash floods, but I'd never seen anything like this. I was reaching for my radio to call it in when I heard footsteps behind me. "Don't bother with the radio," a voice said. "Won't work up here." I spun around, hand moving to my sidearm, and saw another ranger walking into the campsite. He was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with the kind of hard face you see on guys who've been to war. "Dale Morrison," he said, showing me his badge. "Just transferred in from Wyoming. Got the call about the missing family, but looks like we're too late." "Bear Whitfield," I said, relaxing a little. "And you're right about the radio. Been nothing but static since yesterday." Morrison nodded like he'd expected that. He walked around the bodies, looking at them carefully, but not touching anything. His face showed no surprise at what he was seeing, no shock, like arranged corpses with missing eyes were just part of the job. "You ever seen anything like this before?" I asked. He stopped walking and looked at me with pale blue eyes that seemed much older than his face. "Once," he said, "in Wyoming. We lost a whole Boy Scout troop to something similar." "Similar how?" "Bodies arranged in patterns, eyes taken, and tracks." That's when he pointed to the ground around the campsite. I'd been so focused on the bodies that I hadn't looked down. But now I saw them. The same 20-inch, 6-toed prints I'd found the day before. Dozens of them, circling the camp like something had walked around and around the family for hours. "What kind of animal makes tracks like that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't make sense. "No animal," Morrison said, quietly. "At least not anymore." Before I could ask what he meant, we heard it. A sound that came from somewhere up the mountain, echoing through the hollows like it was bouncing off the walls of the world. It started low, like wind through a cave. Then it got higher and louder until it sounded almost like screaming, but not human screaming. Something else. Something that might have been human once, a long time ago, but had forgotten how. The sound went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. Morrison had gone pale. "We need to get these bodies out of here," he said. "Now. Shouldn't we wait for the state police? This is a crime scene. The state police can't help with this." He was already moving toward the bodies. "And if we don't move fast, there won't be anyone left to help." As we loaded the Henderson family into body bags, Morrison told me what he knew. Not everything, I could tell he was holding back, but enough to make my skin crawl. "It's got a cycle," he said. "Every 20 years, give or take. Starts with the animals acting strange. All the wildlife clears out of an area like they know something's coming. Then people start going missing or turning up dead." "What's it?" I asked. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. The Cherokee had a name for it, called it a stone giant, said it was a guardian spirit that got corrupted somehow, turned hungry. You believe that? He looked at me with those old eyes. After what I saw in Wyoming, I believe anything's possible. We got the bodies loaded and were heading back to our trucks when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. My truck's headlights were on. Both our trucks had their headlights on, even though neither of us had turned them on. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the lights weren't pointing down the road where we'd parked them. They were pointing up the mountain toward the deeper woods, like something had turned our trucks around while we weren't looking, like something wanted us to see the path it wanted us to take. Mauricio, and saw it too. Without a word, he went to his truck and came back with something that made my heart skip a beat. A rifle loaded with bullets that gleamed silver in the headlight glare. Just in case, he said. As we drove back down the mountain with the bodies of the Henderson family, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Not because I expected to see something following us, but because I was afraid I would. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. 2 more families went missing from campsites in the area. We found their camps, but not their bodies. Just more of those impossible footprints and something that made my stomach turn. Their tents had been turned completely inside out. Not ripped or torn, but perfectly reversed, like someone had very carefully unstitched every seam and put them back together wrong. All their gear was there, but it looked like it had been melted and reformed. Camping stoves twisted into impossible shapes, sleeping bags fused together in ways that hurt to look at. And everything was cold. Not just cool from the mountain air, but cold like it had been sitting in a freezer for weeks. Morrison and I started patrolling together. He never said it out loud, but I could tell he didn't want either of us to be alone up there. Smart thinking, as it turned out. On the 3rd night, we were camped at the old mining station, taking turns on watch. It was about 2 a.m. when Morrison shook me awake. "It's here," he whispered. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, and we crept to the window of the old station house. Morrison had a pair of night vision binoculars, and he handed them to me. "Look toward the big oak tree," he said, "about 50 yards out." I put the binoculars to my eyes and nearly dropped them. There was something standing by the tree, something tall and wrong and impossible. Even through the green glow of the night vision, I could tell it wasn't natural. It looked like a man, but stretched too tall and too thin. Maybe 9 feet high, with arms that hung almost to the ground. But the worst part was how it moved. It didn't walk. It flowed, like it was made of thick liquid that had learned to hold a human shape. And it was fast. Faster than anything that size should be. As I watched, it turned toward our window. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could see its eyes. They glowed red like heated metal, and they were looking right at us. Then it did something that made my blood turn to ice water. It spoke. Not in its own voice, whatever that might sound like. It spoke in my wife's voice, in Linda's voice, calling my name across the darkness. "Tommy," it said, and the voice was perfect. Every inflection, every soft Virginia accent exactly like I remembered. "Tommy, why did you let me die? Why didn't you save me?" My hands started shaking so hard I could barely hold the binoculars. Because that was exactly what Linda had said to me in my dreams every night since the accident. Word for word. "Don't listen to it," Morrison whispered. But his voice was shaking too. The thing moved closer to our window, and now it was speaking in a different voice, a child's voice. "Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared. Why won't you come help me?" It was Sarah. My daughter's voice, perfect and terrified and calling for help. I was halfway to the door before Morrison grabbed my arm. "It's not her," he said. "It's not either of them. That thing can sound like anyone it wants." But hearing Sarah's voice crying for help was like having my heart torn out. Every instinct I had as a father was screaming at me to run toward that voice, to protect my little girl. The thing outside laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass mixed with screaming. Then it started moving around the building in a circle, and as it moved, it kept talking in different voices. Linda's voice. "You never really loved me, did you?" Sarah's voice. "Daddy, it's so dark here, I can't find you." My own voice. "I should have died instead of her, and then, worst of all, my mother's voice from when I was 7 years old. "Tommy, you're a disappointment. You always have been." It went on for hours. The thing circled our building again and again, using every voice from my past to try to break me down. Voices of people I'd loved, people I'd lost, people who'd hurt me. It knew them all. Morrison was going through the same hell. I could see tears streaming down his face as the thing used voices from his own past against him. Just before dawn, the voices stopped. We looked out the window, and the thing was gone. But it had left us a message. Scratched into the dirt in front of our building, in letters 6 feet tall, were the words, "Tonight you come to me." And below that, an arrow pointing toward the deepest part of the hollow, toward the old mine shafts where 47 men had died and been buried 50 years ago. Morrison stared at the message for a long time. Then he went to his truck and started pulling out equipment I'd never seen before. Salt mixed with silver dust, symbols carved on pieces of bone, a knife with strange markings on the blade. "Where'd you get all this?" I asked. "From someone who knows how to fight these things," he said. "An old Shoshone woman in Wyoming. She told me if I ever ran into another one, these might help." "Another one? How many of these things are out there?" Morrison looked at me with those tired eyes. "More than you want to know. They're old, Bear. Older than the Cherokee. Older than any tribe we know about. They sleep for decades, sometimes centuries. But when they wake up, they're hungry." He handed me a small leather pouch filled with the silver salt mixture. "Keep this on you, and if you get a chance to run tonight, take it. Don't try to be a hero." "What about you?" "I didn't run in Wyoming, lost a lot of good people because of it." He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded with those silver bullets. "Tonight I'm going to finish what I should have finished back then." As the sun set behind the mountains, we gathered our gear and started walking toward the deep hollow, toward whatever was waiting for us in the old mine shafts. I thought about Sarah, safe at home with her grandmother. I thought about Linda, and how I never got to say goodbye properly. I thought about all the missing people I'd found over the years, and how I'd never found one like this. Most of all, I thought about how quiet the mountains had become. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just the sound of our boots on the old mining road and the feeling that something ancient and hungry was watching us walk toward it. The thing had told us to come to it. We were going. But I had a feeling that only one of us was going to walk back out of those hills. The mine entrance was bigger than I'd expected. A black mouth in the mountainside, easily tall enough for a truck to drive through. The old wooden supports were still there, rotted and twisted with age, but the tunnel beyond disappeared into darkness so complete it seemed solid. Morrison stopped at the entrance and pulled out a flashlight with the brightest beam I'd ever seen. It cut through maybe 30 feet of the darkness before getting swallowed up. "It's in there," he said quietly, "deep in there, where the old Cherokee burial ground meets the mine where those men died." "How do you know all this?" "Because the pattern's always the same. These things need a place where death happened. Lots of death. The Cherokee buried their warriors here for centuries. Then the mine disaster added 47 more souls to the mix." He checked his rifle one more time. "All that death in one place, it creates a kind of doorway, and sometimes things come through that shouldn't." We entered the mine shaft, our flashlights creating a small bubble of light in the overwhelming dark. The air smelled like metal and decay, with an undertone of something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. Our footsteps, P.S. echoed weirdly, like the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't there. And it was cold. Colder than any cave should be, even in October. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when Morrison grabbed my arm and pointed his light at the walls. They were covered with scratches. Not random scratches. Deliberate marks like writing. Symbols that looked almost like letters but weren't from any alphabet I knew. "Cherokee?" I asked. Morrison shook his head. "Older. Much older." That's when we started seeing the bones. They were arranged in patterns along the walls. Perfect geometric shapes made from human skulls and ribs and leg bones. Some of the arrangements were small, maybe 2 or 3 feet across. Others stretched from floor to ceiling, massive mandalas of death that must have taken hours to create. "How many people has this thing killed?" I whispered. "Not just people," Morrison said. "Animals, too. Look." He was right. Mixed in with the human bones were the skeletons of deer, bears, birds. Hundreds of them, all arranged in those same impossible patterns. We kept walking deeper into the mine. The tunnel split and branched, but Morrison seemed to know where he was going. He led us always downward, toward the heart of the mountain. Finally, we reached a massive cavern. Our flashlights couldn't find the walls or ceiling, just endless darkness stretching out around us. But we could hear something moving in that darkness, something big. Morrison pulled out one of his bone charms and held it up. It started glowing with a faint blue light, and in that light, we finally saw it. The thing was 12 feet tall and looked like it had been carved from black stone and coal. Its shape was roughly human, but wrong in every detail. Too many joints in its arms and legs, fingers that were more like talons, a face that might have been human once but had been stretched and twisted into something nightmarish, and its eyes, red like glowing coals, ancient and intelligent and hungry. When it saw us, it smiled. Its mouth was full of teeth like broken glass. "Welcome," it said, and its voice was like rocks grinding together. "I have been waiting." Morrison raised his rifle and fired 3 shots. The silver bullets hit the thing square in the chest, and it staggered back. But the wounds closed almost immediately, the stone-like skin flowing back together. The thing laughed. "Bullets will not work here, little man. This is my place, my power." It moved toward us, and I saw that its feet never quite touched the ground. It floated inches above the cavern floor, leaving those impossible 6-toed prints in the stone as if its weight could press through space itself. Morrison grabbed something else from his pack, a small bundle of what looked like dried tobacco wrapped in leather. He set it on fire and threw it at the creature's feet. The thing stopped moving. For the first time, it looked uncertain. "Cherokee sacred tobacco," Morrison said, "blessed by a medicine woman. You remember that, don't you? You remember what you used to be before the hunger took you." The creature's expression changed. For just a moment, the rage and hunger faded from its glowing eyes, replaced by something that might have been sadness. "I remember," it said, and now its voice sounded almost human. "I was the guardian. I protected the sacred places. But when the mountain died, when the miners' souls cried out for vengeance, I tried to help them. I tried to carry their pain." "And it corrupted you," Morrison said. "Turned you into something that feeds on death instead of preventing it." The thing nodded slowly. "I became what I fought against. And now I cannot stop. Every 20 years, the hunger returns. I must feed, or I will fade away completely." "There's another way," Morrison said. "The medicine woman taught me. A binding ritual. It won't destroy you, but it will put you to sleep again, for a long time." The creature considered this. Then it shook its head. "Too late. I am too far gone. And besides," it looked directly at me, "I have already chosen my final meal." Before I could react, the thing lunged forward, not at Morrison, but at me. Its stone hands wrapped around my throat, and I felt a cold like liquid ice pouring into my body. I could feel it draining something from me, not my blood or my breath, but something deeper. My memories, my thoughts, my very self started slipping away. But then Morrison did something I didn't expect. Instead of trying to save me, he pulled out his knife, the one with the strange markings, and drove it into his own chest. His blood poured out onto the cavern floor, and where it touched the stone, symbols began to glow. The same symbols we'd seen scratched into the mine walls, but now they were burning with bright silver light. The creature dropped me and spun toward Morrison. "What have you done?" "What I should have done in Wyoming," Morrison gasped. He was dying fast, but he was still talking. "A blood binding. My life to power the ritual. Bear, You have to complete the circle. Use my blood. Draw the symbols." I didn't understand what he meant, but somehow my hands seemed to know. I dipped my fingers in Morrison's blood and started drawing symbols on the cavern floor around the creature. The knowledge came from somewhere deep inside me, like it had been there all along, waiting to be awakened. The creature roared and tried to break free of the circle, but the glowing symbols held it in place. "You cannot bind me," it screamed. "I am eternal." "You're tired," I said, and somehow I knew it was true. "You've been tired for 50 years. The hunger is eating you up from the inside. Let it end." The creature looked at me with those ancient red eyes, and I saw the truth. It wasn't evil, not really. It was in pain. Constant, terrible pain from carrying the anger and fear of 47 dead miners for half a century. "Sleep," I said, completing the last symbol. "Let them all rest." The creature's form began to dissolve, turning back into shadow and stone and coal dust. As it faded, I heard its voice one last time, but now it sounded peaceful. "Thank you," it whispered. The cavern shook, and I heard the sound of stone cracking. The mine was collapsing. I grabbed Morrison's body and ran for the entrance, the ceiling falling behind me with every step. I barely made it out alive. They found me 3 days later, half dead from thirst and exposure, carrying Morrison's body down the mountain. I told them there had been a cave-in, that Morrison had been crushed by falling rocks trying to investigate the mine shaft. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to dig too deep into what had really happened up there. The official report said it was a tragic accident during a routine investigation of missing campers. But things changed for me after that night. I stopped drinking. Completely. Not because I didn't want to anymore, but because I couldn't. Every time I tried to take a drink, I'd taste something else in the alcohol, something metallic and cold that reminded me of that cavern. I started having dreams in Cherokee, actual Cherokee words and phrases, which was impossible because I'd never learned the language. But when I woke up, I'd know what the dreams meant. They were always about protection, about watching over the sacred places and keeping the balance. I taught Sarah everything I could about the old stories, not as entertainment, but as warnings. She learned to recognize the signs when something unnatural was stirring in the mountains. She learned the protective symbols and how to use salt and tobacco to ward off things that shouldn't exist. Most importantly, I started reaching out to other rangers around the country. Quietly, carefully. I found there were more of us than you might think. People who'd encountered things in the deep woods that couldn't be explained in any official report. We share information now. We watch for the signs. And when something starts stirring in places where it shouldn't, we're ready. Because the thing Morrison and I faced in that mine wasn't unique. It was just one of many guardians that had been corrupted over the centuries. And they all follow the same cycle. Long periods of sleep followed by brief, terrible periods of hunger. I go back to that sealed mine once a month. Not to go inside. The entrance has been permanently blocked by tons of fallen rock. But to check on the binding, to make sure it's holding. So far, it has held. For over 40 years now, it's held. But lately, I've been noticing signs that worry me. Animals avoiding the area again. Temperatures dropping for no reason. My radio getting that familiar static when I'm near the old mine site. The binding is weakening, which means eventually something will have to be done about it. And when that time comes, I'll be ready. Or maybe it'll be Sarah's turn. She's a ranger now too, working in these same mountains. She knows the signs to watch for. She knows the old stories are more than stories. And she knows that some things are worth dying to keep contained. My name is Thomas Whitfield. People call me Bear. I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for over 50 years now, and I know every secret these hills can keep, most of them anyway. The ones I don't know yet, I'm still learning about, and every single one of them scares me more than the last. But that's okay. Fear keeps you alive in these mountains. Fear keeps you respectful of things that are older and stranger than human understanding. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, fear keeps you from becoming the next cautionary tale that old rangers tell young ones around the fire. Sometimes, My name is Margaret Callahan, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I've been doing this job for 8 years now. Some folks still think a woman has no business walking these mountains alone, but I proved them wrong a long time ago. I know these woods better than most people know their own backyards. I can tell you which plants are safe to eat, where the bears like to sleep, and how to read the weather just by watching the clouds. I've found 3 new kinds of flowers that nobody ever wrote about before. The other rangers respect me now, even if it took them a while. My area covers about 50 square miles around Cades Cove. It's beautiful country, with old log cabins scattered through the valleys and ridges that seem to go on forever. Most of the cabins are empty now. The families that built them moved away years ago, looking for easier lives in the cities. But there's one place that always made me feel strange. Bone Hollow, we call it. It's a narrow valley about 15 miles from Gatlinburg, with an old cemetery and some broken-down cabins. The road to get there is just dirt, and it washes out every time it rains hard. No phone lines reach that far back in the mountains. The name comes from all the old bones you find there, deer mostly, but sometimes bigger animals. They say there was a settlement there before the Civil War, but something bad happened. Disease, maybe. The whole place has a feeling like it's holding its breath. I never believed in ghosts or spirits. When people told me they heard whistling in Bone Hollow, I just said it was wind blowing through the old chimneys. When they said they saw lights moving between the trees at night, I figured it was just their eyes playing tricks. That was before November 15th, 1964, before I learned that some things can't be explained away with common sense. It started with a phone call on a cold morning. The first snow had fallen the night before, just a light dusting that made everything look clean and new. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when Sheriff Patterson called. "Maggie, we got a problem up in Bone Hollow," he said. His voice sounded shaky, which wasn't like him. "Some college boys went up there to dig around in that old cemetery. Found them this morning and, well, you better come see for yourself." I drove up the winding dirt road in my truck, taking it slow on account of the snow. The trees looked different in winter, all gray and black, reaching up like skeleton fingers. As I got closer to Bone Hollow, the air seemed to get colder, even inside the truck. Sheriff Patterson was waiting for me at the edge of the cemetery, along with Doc Miller and 2 deputies. They all looked pale and sick. "They're over here," Patterson said, leading me between the old headstones. Most of the graves were so old you couldn't read the names anymore. What I saw there still gives me nightmares. 3 young men lying in a perfect triangle, their arms stretched toward the center. They were college students from the University of Tennessee, up here doing research for some archaeology project. Their equipment was smashed to pieces. Cameras, measuring tools, notebooks torn apart like wild animals had gotten to them. But the strangest thing was their faces. They looked terrified, more scared than anyone should ever look. And they looked old. Not just dead, but ancient, like they'd aged 50 years in a single night. Their hair had gone completely white, and their fingernails had grown so long they curled around their fingers. "What do you think, Maggie?" Doc Miller asked. "Bear attack?" I walked around the bodies looking for tracks or signs of what had happened. But there were no claw marks, no blood, no animal prints in the snow, just besom. But these 3 men arranged in a pattern that made my skin crawl. "I don't know," I said. "This doesn't look like any animal I've ever seen." That's when Deputy Johnson held up a small tape. "Recorder. Found this playing when we got here," he said. "Still had battery left." He pressed the play button. What came out made my blood turn cold. It was music, a whistling tune that sounded beautiful and terrible at the same time. But it was playing backwards, all mixed up and wrong. And underneath the music, you could hear something else. Footsteps, dancing footsteps, going round and round. "Turn it off," I said, louder than I meant to. The sheriff looked at me funny. "You okay, Maggie?" I wasn't okay. Something about that music made me feel sick and scared and sad all at once. It reminded me of my fiancée Tommy, who died in the war 20 years ago. It made me think of every person I'd ever lost, every sad thing that had ever happened. "We need to get a specialist up here," I said. "Someone who knows about unusual animal behavior. That afternoon, a man named Dr. James Hartwell drove up from Asheville. He said he was a folklore expert from the university, come to study the natural phenomena in the area. He was tall and thin, with gray eyes that seemed to see everything at once, but I could tell he wasn't telling me the whole truth. Dr. Hartwell spent the first day taking pictures and making notes. He asked a lot of questions about the local history, about old stories people told. Every time I mentioned the whistling sounds people claimed to hear, his eyes got sharp and interested. That night, we camped near the cemetery. I didn't want to, but Hartwell insisted we needed to observe the area after dark. We sat by a small fire, drinking coffee from tin cups and listening to the wind in the trees. "Tell me about the Cherokee legends," Hartwell said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "The old stories. About this place." I thought for a minute. My grandmother used to tell me things she heard from the Cherokee families. They called this place something that meant, "Whoa, here the bone singer calls." Said there was a spirit here that could make the dead dance. Hartwell wrote everything down in a little notebook. "Anything else?" "Just old stories," I said. "Nothing real." But even as I said it, I felt like someone was watching us from the dark trees. The fire seemed smaller than it should be, and the night felt too quiet. Around midnight, we heard it. Whistling. Beautiful, sad whistling coming from somewhere in the cemetery. It was the same tune from the tape recorder, but this time it was playing forward, the way music should sound. "Stay here," Hartwell whispered, but I was already standing up. The music was so pretty, it made my chest ache. It reminded me of lullabies my mother used to sing, of church hymns on Sunday morning, of every song that had ever made me cry. Without thinking about it, I started walking toward the sound. "Maggie, stop!" Hartwell grabbed my arm. "Don't go toward it." But I could barely hear him. The whistling was getting louder, more beautiful. It sounded like it was coming from the center of the cemetery, where those 3 college boys had died. Then I saw something that made me freeze. The bodies were gone, but something else was there instead. Shapes moving in the moonlight, dancing in a slow circle around the broken headstones. They looked like people, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that hurt to watch. And in the middle of them all, playing a whistle made of bone, was something that might have been a man once. He was 7 feet tall, wearing old-fashioned clothes that hung on him like rags. Where his eyes should have been, there were just dark holes. His fingers were too long, like they were made of bone instead of flesh. The dancing shapes turned toward us, and I saw their faces. They were the 3 college students. But they looked different now, older, deader, with skin like old paper and eyes like empty windows. They kept dancing, spinning around the whistling figure like children playing Ring Around the Rosie. "We need to leave," Hartwell said. "Right now." But I couldn't move. The music held me like chains. I wanted to join the dance, to spin and spin until everything made sense again. Then Hartwell did something that saved my life. He grabbed a burning stick from our fire and threw it right at the bone whistler. The moment the flame touched the creature, everything changed. The music stopped like someone had cut a wire. The dancing figures crumbled to dust, and the tall thing with the bone whistle screamed. A sound like wind through broken glass. Then they were all gone, and we were standing alone in the cemetery with our hearts pounding like drums. "What was that?" I whispered. Hartwell was looking at his hands. In the firelight, I could see that his brown hair had streaks of gray that hadn't been there before. "Something that's been here a long time," he said. "Something that feeds on death and time." The next morning, we found 4 more bodies. They were arranged in a bigger triangle, further out from the cemetery. A family of hikers who'd gone missing 2 days before. Like the college students, they looked ancient, with white hair and long fingernails and faces frozen in terror. But worse than that, I could see my own reflection in a puddle of melted snow, and my red hair had silver streaks running through it. "It's aging us," Hartwell said quietly. "Every time we get close to it, every time we hear the music, we lose time from our lives." "How do you know so much about this?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge I'd never seen before. "I don't work for the university," he said. "I work for the government. We've been tracking this thing for 20 years. That's when he told me the truth. After the incident at Roswell, the government started paying attention to things that couldn't be explained. They had files on creatures like this one, scattered reports from all over the Appalachian Mountains. "It's not the first time," he said. "Every few decades, something like this happens. People disappear, or they're found dead and aged beyond recognition. Always in places with old graveyards. Always where there's been tragedy. So what is it? We call them bone singers. They're spirits that got tied to death somehow, and they use music to control time and pull the dead back into the world. This one's been here since at least 1847. I thought about that date. The settlement that died out. The typhoid outbreak. Maybe the typhoid outbreak was just the cover story. As we talked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The bodies of the college students were gone again, and so were the hikers. But I could hear music starting up in the distance, faint and beautiful. They were dancing again. Over the next 3 days, things got worse fast. We found more bodies, hunters, campers, even some local folks who'd gone missing over the years, all of them arranged in bigger and bigger patterns around the cemetery, like someone was drawing a giant picture with dead people. And every night, the music got louder. Hartwell tried to explain what was happening. The bone singer was getting stronger, feeding off all the death and fear in the area. The more people it killed, the more power it had to bring them back as dancing puppets. "It's building to something," he said. "Some kind of final performance." We tried calling for help, but the phone lines were down. The radio in my truck just played static. Even the road out of Bone Hollow had washed out in a sudden storm that came from nowhere. We were trapped. On the third night, I woke up to find Hartwell missing from our camp. I followed his footprints in the snow, and they led straight to the cemetery. I found him standing at the edge of the dancing circle, swaying to the bone-whipped Stell's tune. His hair was almost completely gray now, and his face looked 10 years older. "Hartwell!" I shouted, but he didn't seem to hear me. The bone singer was there too, tall and terrible in the moonlight. Up close, I could see that his whistle was made from a human thigh bone, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. Around him, maybe 20 dead people danced in perfect circles. The college students, the hikers, and others I didn't recognize. All of them had their eyes fixed on me. I grabbed Hartwell's arm and pulled him away from the circle. The moment I touched him, the music stopped, and all the dancing figures turned to stare at us. "Run," Hartwell whispered. We ran through the snow, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind us I could hear footsteps, dozens of them, all keeping perfect time like soldiers marching. We made it back to our camp, but barely. When I looked back, I could see shapes moving between the trees, always just out of sight. "It's getting stronger," Hartwell said. He was breathing hard, and his hands were shaking. "Every night it adds more dancers to its collection. Soon it'll have enough power to spread beyond the hollow." "What do you mean?" "These things don't just stay in one place forever. Once they get strong enough, they start moving. The music carries for miles. It could reach Gatlinburg, or Asheville, or even further." I thought about all the people in those towns, families, children, folks who had no idea what was coming for them. "How do we stop it?" Hartwell pulled out a file folder, thick with old papers and photographs. "We've been studying this for years. There's only one way to break the bond between a bone singer and its territory." He showed me a photograph of what looked like a piece of bone carved into a whistle. It was covered in symbols, some of them Cherokee, others that looked older. "The original whistle," he said. "Not the one the creature carries now, that's just a copy it made. The real one is hidden somewhere in the old settlement. If we can find it and destroy it, the bone singer loses its power. And if we can't?" He didn't answer, but I could see the truth in his eyes. We were both aging fast from being close to the creature. I'd lost maybe 5 years already, and Hartwell looked like he'd aged 15. We had maybe one more encounter left before we got too old to fight. The next morning, we started searching the ruins of the old settlement. Most of the buildings had fallen down long ago, but you could still see the foundations and the old stone chimneys. It was Hartwell who found the diary. It was hidden under the floorboards of what must have been the largest cabin, wrapped in oiled leather to protect it from moisture. The writing was faded, but readable. October 12th, 1847. The musician came to us in our darkest hour. The typhoid has taken so many. My Sarah, little John, half the settlement. When he offered to bring them back with his music, we thought he was an angel. October 20th, 1847. They dance now in the cemetery every night. But they are not as they were. Their eyes are empty. Their touch is cold. The musician demands more and more, always more death to feed his terrible song. October 25th, 1847. We tried to kill him, but bullets passed through him like smoke. Jonathan says the Cherokee warned about such things, spirits that steal time and make the dead serve them. The old shaman gave us a way to bind the evil, but the cost. October 30th, 1847. It is done. We destroyed his bone whistle and trapped his spirit in the hollow. But the shaman's binding required a life freely given. I pray God forgives me for what I've chosen to do. The new whistle is hidden where the stones make a cross. May no one ever find it. That was the last entry. But it told us what we needed to know. The original bone whistle was still here, hidden somewhere among the ruins. And it was the only thing that could stop the bone sing, from spreading its evil beyond the hollow. But as we searched through the broken buildings, I could hear the music starting again in the distance. And this time it sounded different, louder, more confident. The creature knew we were here, and it was ready for us. We found the whistle at sunset. It was buried under a pile of stones arranged in the shape of a cross, just like the diary said. The whistle looked ancient, carved from human bone and covered with Cherokee symbols. Even touching it made my skin crawl. "This is it," Hartwell said. "This is what's been controlling the bone singer all these years." But as we dug it up, the music started again, louder than ever before, coming from all directions at once. And with it came the sound of footsteps, hundreds of them, marching toward us through the darkening forest. "It knows," I said. "It knows what we found." All around the ruins, shapes emerged from the trees. The dancing dead, all the people the bone singer had claimed over the years. They moved in perfect formation, closing in on us from every side. And leading them was the creature itself. In the dying light, it looked even more terrible than before. 7 feet tall, dressed in the rotting clothes of a traveling musician from over a century ago. Its face was nothing but skull and shadow, and where its heart should have been, there was a gaping hole that seemed to swallow light. In its bony hands, it carried the copy of the whistle, the instrument it used to control time and death. "You cannot stop the music," it said, and its voice was like wind through a graveyard. "The dance goes on forever." It raised the whistle to where its lips should have been and began to play. The music was beautiful and horrible at the same time. It made me want to cry and scream and dance all at once. I felt years draining away from me with every note, my hair turning gray, my hands getting wrinkled and old. But I held on to the real whistle, the original one that could stop this nightmare. "Play it," Hartwell shouted. "Play the counter melody." I'd never played a whistle in my life, but somehow I knew what to do. The Cherokee symbols on the bone seemed to glow with their own light, and I could feel the knowledge of the old shaman flowing through me. I put the whistle to my lips and played. The music that came out was different from the bone singer's tune. Where his was about death and endings, mine was about life and growing things. Where his was about trapping souls, mine was about setting them free. The two melodies clashed in the air like swords striking together. Around us, reality started to break apart. Past and present mixed together. I could see the original settlement as it had been, full of living people going about their daily lives. I could see the typhoid outbreak, the desperate families begging the traveling musician to bring back their loved ones. I could see the final battle when the settlers realized their mistake and tried to stop the creature they had unleashed. The dancing dead stopped moving. For the first time in over a century, they were free from the bone singer's control. Some of them simply faded away like morning mist. Others turned to look at their tormentor with anger in their empty eyes. "No!" the creature screamed. "The dance must go on. Death must have its music." It played louder, pouring all its evil power into the bone whistle. But I played louder too, and my music was stronger because it was about hope instead of despair. Then Hartwell did something that saved us all. He stepped between me and the bone singer, taking the full force of the creature's aging power on himself. I watched in horror as he crumbled to dust in seconds, sacrificing his life to give me the time I needed to finish the counter-melody. The original whistle grew hot in my hands, so hot it almost burned my fingers. The Cherokee cymbals blazed with white light, and with a sound like thunder, the ancient bone cracked in hells. The bone singer's scream shattered every window in the ruined settlement. Its form wavered like smoke in the wind, growing thinner and more transparent with every second. "This is not possible," it gasped. "Yes, it is," I said, "because people are stronger than death, and love is stronger than fear." The creature made one last desperate attempt to grab me, but its fingers passed through my body like cold mist. Then it collapsed into dust, nothing left but a pile of old bones and rotting cloth. All around us, the dead danced one final time, but now they were dancing with joy, celebrating their freedom. One by one, they faded away into peace, finally able to rest. The settlement flickered back to ruins. The forest grew quiet, and I stood alone among the broken stones, holding the pieces of the ancient whistle. I was old now, maybe 60 instead of 31, my hair silver white, my face lined with wrinkles. The bone singer's power had aged me decades in a single night, but I was alive, and the nightmare was finally over. They found me 3 days later when the roads cleared and the phone lines started working again. I was sitting by the ruins of the old settlement, holding the pieces of the bone whistle. The official story was simple. A gas leak from an old mine shaft had caused hallucinations and disorientation. Dr. Hartwell had died of exposure while trying to help the missing hikers. The archaeological team had suffered the same fate. Nothing supernatural about it at all. I didn't argue with the story. Who would have believed the truth? They put me in the hospital for a week, trying to figure out why a 31-year-old woman suddenly looked like she was in her 60s. The doctors had a lot of theories about stress and shock, but no real answers. Eventually, they let me go home. I couldn't go back to being a field ranger after that. My body was too old, too worn out for hiking mountain trails. So they gave me a desk job at the park headquarters, helping with research and folklore collection. It was actually perfect for what I need to do. Because the thing is, the bone singer wasn't the only supernatural threat in these mountains. Over the years, I started noticing patterns: missing hikers, strange animal attacks, places where compasses spun wildly and cameras stopped working. I built a network of people who understood what was really out there. A few other park rangers, some Cherokee elders who remembered the old stories, even a couple of government agents like Hartwell had been. We kept watch for signs of trouble, and when we found it, we dealt with it quietly. Most folks never knew how many times we saved their lives. But I made sure to visit Bone Hollow every year on the anniversary of that terrible night, just to check that the ancient evil stayed buried. The whistle pieces are locked in a safe in my office, wrapped in Cherokee blessing cloth that an old medicine woman gave me. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, I think I can still hear faint music coming from the hollow. But it's different now, sadder, more distant, like an echo of an echo, slowly fading away. I'm 73 years old now, according to my birth certificate, but I feel much older than that. When you've looked into the face of something that feeds on death and time, when you've watched good people sacrifice themselves to save others, you carry that weight forever. The young rangers think I'm just a harmless old lady who tells too many ghost stories. They humor me when I warn them about certain areas of the park, about places where they should never go alone after dark. But sometimes, late at night when the mountain fog rolls in thick, one of them will come to my office with a story about something they saw or heard, something that couldn't be explained by normal means. And I'll listen and nod and add another entry to my files, because the mountains are old and they remember everything. And there are some kinds of moose like that should never be played again. My name is Margaret Callahan, and I used to be a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. Now I'm something else, a guardian, I suppose, keeping watch over secrets that most people are better off not knowing. The work is never finished. Evil finds new ways to creep back into the world, like water seeping through cracks in a stone wall. But as long as there are people willing to stand guard, willing to sacrifice their own safety for the sake of others, the darkness can be held back, at least for a while. And in the quiet moments, when I'm sitting in my office reading reports of strange happenings or writing letters to other guardians scattered across the country, I sometimes remember Dr. James Hartwell, how he stepped between me and certain death, how he crumbled to dust so that I could save everyone else. I never even learned his real first name, but I think he would be proud of what we've built in his memory. A network of watchers, keeping the world safe from the things that hunt in the darkness and call the dead to dance. The music has stopped in Bone Hollow, but somewhere else in these ancient mountains, another melody is always starting, and we'll be listening. My name is Vincent Turner, but everyone just calls me Vince. I've been a park ranger here in Shenandoah National Park for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was September 1973, and the leaves were just starting to change. The tourists were heading home, and hunting season was coming up fast. That's always been my favorite time of year, when the park gets quiet and you can hear yourself think again. I'm 38 years old, been working these woods since I got back from Vietnam in '62. 2 tours over there taught me how to track, how to survive, and how to spot danger before it spots you. The Park Service seemed like a good fit. Wide open spaces, fresh air, no one shooting at me. It helped me sleep better at night. My beat was the backcountry around Painter's Creek. About 25 square miles of old-growth forest, rocky ridges, and hidden waterfalls. It's beautiful country, but it's wild country. The kind of place where you can walk for days and never see another person. The kind of place where you better know what you're doing because help is a long way off. I lived alone in a small cabin near the ranger station. Never married. Well, I tried once, but Sarah couldn't handle the nightmares and the long silences. Can't say I blamed her. After what I saw in the jungle, sometimes it was hard to remember how to be around regular people. Most folks who visit the park stick to the main trails. They take their pictures, have their picnics, and go home with nice memories. But every now and then, someone wanders off the beaten path. That's when I usually get called in. The morning everything started, I was sitting on my porch with my coffee, watching the mist roll off the mountains. It was peaceful, quiet. Then my radio crackled to life. "Turner, you there?" It was Bob Martinez, the head ranger. "Yeah, Bob. What's up?" "We got a problem up at Painter's Creek. Hunting party went missing 3 days ago. Their truck's still at the trailhead, but no sign of them." I set down my coffee. In 11 years, I'd found lost hikers, dealt with bear encounters, even pulled a few bodies out of the creek after flash floods. But 6 grown men don't just vanish. "I'll head up there," I said. "Take the new girl with you, Davis. She needs the experience." Kelly Davis had been with the Park Service for all of 3 months. She was 24, fresh out of training, and eager to prove she could handle anything. I wasn't thrilled about babysitting a rookie, but I figured a simple search and rescue would be good for her. We drove up the old fire road in my Jeep, the engine grinding as we climbed toward the higher elevations. Davis was quiet, checking and rechecking her gear. I could tell she was nervous. "What do you think happened to them?" she asked as we bounced over a pothole. "Could be anything," I said. "Got turned around, maybe. Or hurt. We'll find their trail and follow it." But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Just the sound of our engine and the wind in the trees. In Vietnam, we called it the silence before. It usually meant trouble was coming. We parked at the trailhead and found the hunter's truck right where Bob said it would be. A big Ford pickup with Tennessee plates. The doors were unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Their gear was gone, but they'd left behind a cooler full of beer and sandwiches. They were planning to come back, Davis said. I nodded, but I was looking at something else. Scratches on the truck's paint, long, deep gouges that went right down to the metal. Too high up to be from a bear, too wide to be from a cat. What made those? Davis asked. I shook my head. Let's find their rail. The hunting party had taken the main path toward Painter's Creek, but about a mile in, their tracks veered off into thicker woods. I could follow the boot prints easily enough. 6 men in a rough line, moving slow and careful like hunters do. That's when we found the first camp. The camp was wrong from the moment we saw it. The hunters had set up in a clearing next to a small stream, but something had torn through it like a tornado. Tents were shredded, sleeping bags scattered, cooking gear thrown everywhere. But it wasn't random destruction. Someone, or something, had arranged the personal items in neat little piles. Wallets in one pile, watches in another, hunting knives lined up like they were for sale. It was organized, deliberate. Animals don't do this, Davis whispered. I was thinking the same thing, but I'd learned not to jump to conclusions. Could be other people. Maybe they were robbed. What kind of robber leaves the wallets behind? I didn't have an answer for that. We kept following the trail. The boot prints were clearer now, deeper, like the men had been running. And there were other tracks too. Big ones. Bare feet, but not human feet. Too long, too wide, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. Vince, Davis said, her voice tight. You need to see this. She was standing next to a pine tree about 15 feet off the trail. Deep scratches ran down the bark, starting about 12 feet up and going down to shoulder height. The cuts were fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds. What animal can reach that high? She asked. Bear can stand on its hind legs, I said, but I didn't believe it myself. No bear I'd ever seen could reach 12 feet up a tree. The tracks led us deeper into the woods, following an old deer path that wound between massive oak trees and thick patches of mountain laurel. The silence was getting worse. Not even insects buzzing. It was like every living thing had fled. We found the first body just before noon. He was lying face down in a pile of leaves, arms spread wide like he was trying to fly. From a distance, he looked like he might just be sleeping, but when I rolled him over, I had to bite back a curse. His skull was crushed. Not cracked or broken, completely caved in, like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. But there was no blood splatter, no sign of a struggle, just the massive trauma and a look of absolute terror frozen on his face. Davis turned away and was sick behind a tree. I didn't blame her. In Vietnam, I'd seen what bullets and shrapnel could do to a man, but this was different. This was personal, close up, brutal. What could do this? She asked when she came back, wiping her mouth. I don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. I'd heard stories from the old-timers, tales the Cherokee used to tell about things that lived in these mountains, things that were big and strong and didn't like visitors. I'd always figured they were just stories. We found the second body 100 yards further on. Same thing, skull crushed, no other injuries, that same look of terror. This one was partially buried under a pile of rocks, arranged in a neat cairn like some kind of grave marker. We need to call this in, Davis said. I nodded, but when I tried the radio, all I got was static. The mountains were blocking our signal. We're on our own until we get back to the Jeep, I said. The trail led us up a steep ridge following switchbacks that had probably been deer paths for hundreds of years. The trees were older here, bigger. Some of them had to be 300 years old or more. This was the kind of forest that was here when the Cherokee still hunted these hills. Near the top of the ridge, we found the rest of the hunting party. All 4 bodies were arranged in a circle around what looked like an ancient campfire ring. Just blackened stones and old ashes, probably from Indians who'd camped here generations ago. The men were facing east, toward the rising sun, their crushed skulls all tilted at the same angle. It's like some kind of ceremony, Davis whispered. I was studying the ground around the bodies. The big tracks were everywhere, now overlapping and circling. Whatever killed these men had spent time here, had arranged them carefully, had maybe even watched them die. That's when I heard it, a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. It was like a human voice, but deeper, rougher, like someone trying to talk with a mouthful of gravel. It was coming from the trees above us. Did you hear that? Davis asked. Yeah, we need to go. Now. But as we turned to leave, I saw something that stopped me cold. On a tree at the edge of the clearing, about 10 feet up, someone had carved a symbol into the bark. It was rough, primitive, but I recognized it. An old Cherokee warning sign that meant sacred ground and keep out. The carving was fresh. The sap was still wet. Vince? Davis was backing toward the trail, her hand on her sidearm. That's when we saw it. Just a glimpse through the trees, maybe 200 yards away. Something big, moving between the trunks. Upright like a man, but too tall, too broad. Dark hair or fur covering its body. And when it turned to look at us, I saw eyes that caught the light like amber coins. It watched us for maybe 10 seconds. Then it melted back into the forest like smoke. What was that? Davis whispered. I don't know, I said. But I was lying again. Deep down, in a part of my mind I didn't like to visit, I thought I knew exactly what it was. The question was, what we were going to do about it. We made it back to the Jeep without seeing the creature again, but I could feel it watching us the whole way. Every shadow seemed to move. Every broken branch sounded like footsteps. By the time we reached the trailhead, we were both jumping at our own shadows. I got on the radio as soon as we were back in range. Bob, we found them. All 6. They're dead. There was a long pause. Dead how? Looks like they were attacked by something. Something big. Bear? I looked at Davis. She shook her head. Maybe. Hard to say. We need the coroner up here and probably the state police. I'll make the calls. You two get back to headquarters. But I had other plans. On the drive back, I took a detour through the little town of Spareville, just outside the park boundary. I needed to talk to someone who might know more about what we'd seen. Ezekiel Hollow lived in a trailer at the end of a dirt road that wound up into the foothills. He was 67 years old, born and raised in these mountains, and he knew stories that went back 4 generations. His grandfather had been alive when the Cherokee still lived here. Zeke was sitting on his porch when we pulled up, whittling a piece of oak and drinking from a mason jar that definitely didn't contain water. Afternoon, Ranger Turner, he said without looking up. Heard there was some trouble up at Painter's Creek. News traveled fast in a small town. Yeah, 6 hunters killed. I was wondering if you might know something about what could have done it. Zeke set down his knife and looked at me with eyes that had seen a lot of years. You see anything unusual up there? I described what we'd found, the arranged bodies, the carved warning, and the thing we'd glimpsed through the trees. Zeke nodded slowly. My grandfather used to tell stories about something like that. Called it the Guardian. Said it was a Cherokee warrior who broke sacred law and got cursed for it. Transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Just stories, though, right? My grandfather shot it once back in 1923. Said it took 3 bullets before it ran off, but it came back the next year, good as new. And the next year after that. Davis shifted uncomfortably beside me. What did it want? To keep people out of its territory. The Cherokee believed certain places were sacred, not for hunting, not for camping, not for anything human. This thing enforces that law. But the Cherokee are long gone, I said. Are they? Zeke took a sip from his jar. Just because the government moved them west doesn't mean their spirits left these mountains. Some things don't change just because a piece of paper says they should. He told us more about how the creature only appeared during hunting season, how it got stronger with each kill, how it was smart enough to use tools and set traps. According to the stories, it had been protecting that stretch of forest for over a century. Is there a way to stop it? I asked. My grandfather thought so, but it cost him dear. Zeke wouldn't say more than that, but he did give me something. An old Cherokee blessing carved into a piece of silver by his grandfather. Might help, he said. Might not. But if you're going back up there, you'll need all the help you can get. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those amber eyes staring at me through the trees. Davis had gone home to her apartment in Luray, but I knew she wasn't sleeping either. I could see it in her face when we said goodnight. Around 2 a.m, my phone rang. Vince? It's Kelly. I'm at the hospital in Front Royal. Someone broke into my apartment. I was out of bed and getting dressed before she finished talking. Are you hurt? No, I wasn't there, but Vince, whoever did it, they didn't take anything. They just destroyed everything. Shredded my furniture, broke my dishes, and they left something on my bed. What? A deer skull, crushed just like those hunters. I told her to stay at the hospital until morning. Then I loaded my rifle with the blessed silver bullets I'd gotten from an old Cherokee woman Zeke had introduced me to, and I sat in my chair by the window, watching the tree line until dawn. The creature was escalating. It wasn't just defending its territory anymore. It was hunting us. The next morning brought more bad news. 2 park maintenance workers had gone missing while checking trails near Painter's Creek, T. Air truck was found abandoned, keys in the ignition, toolbox emptied and arranged in neat piles beside the road. Bob wanted to close that section of the park, but his supervisors in Richmond were pushing back. Tourist season was winding down, but hunting season brought in good money. They wanted definitive proof before they'd consider shutting down 25 square miles of prime hunting territory. What kind of proof do they want? Davis asked. We were sitting in the ranger station looking at maps and trying to figure out the creature's territory. Pictures, Bob said. Video would be better. Something that shows exactly what we're dealing with. You want us to go back up there with a camera? I want whatever's killing people to be stopped. If that means getting close enough for photographs, then that's what we do. I looked at the maps spread out on the table. The attacks had all happened within a rough circle, centered on the old Cherokee campsite where we'd found the hunters. About 5 miles across, with Painter's Creek running right through the middle. It's got a territory, I said, like any predator. Question is, what happens if we enter it on its terms instead of stumbling around blind? Davis looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to go in there deliberately? I want to end this. Those maintenance workers are still missing. If we wait, more people are going to die. That afternoon, we went to see Dr. Richard Novak at Georgetown University. He was a professor of anthropology who studied cryptozoology on the side. Basically, he investigated reports of creatures that weren't supposed to exist. Bigfoot, lake monsters, things like that. Bob had called him in as a consultant, though he wasn't advertising that fact to his superiors. Dr. Novak listened to our story without interrupting. When we finished, he pulled out a thick folder and spread graphs on his desk. Similar cases, he said. Montana, 1967, Oregon, 1971, Northern California last year. Always the same pattern. Hunters found dead in remote areas, killed by massive, blunt force trauma, bodies arranged in ceremonial positions. Same creature? I asked. Or the same type of creature? There are theories that certain very old places with strong spiritual significance to indigenous peoples, sometimes develop their own guardians, protectors that enforce ancient laws. You mean this thing is real? I mean, I've seen enough evidence to keep an open mind. The question is what you plan to do about it. I told him about our plan to return to the creature's territory with cameras and recording equipment. That's extremely dangerous, he said. These entities are intelligent. They can plan, set traps, use psychological warfare. If you corner one, it will fight. What would you suggest? Find another way. Negotiation, perhaps. Respect for its boundaries. But I was thinking about those crushed skulls, about Kelly's destroyed apartment, about the 2 missing maintenance workers. This thing had crossed a line. It wasn't just protecting its territory anymore. It was actively hunting human beings. No, I said. This ends now. That night, I sat on my porch cleaning my rifle and thinking about what Zeke's grandfather had told him. The creature could be hurt. It could be stopped. But it would cost me. I was willing to pay that price. The question was whether Kelly was willing to pay it too. We went in before dawn, moving quiet and careful through the forest like I'd learned to do in Vietnam. Kelly had her camera and sound equipment. I had my rifle loaded with the blessed silver bullets and a pack full of flares, rope, and first aid supplies. The plan was simple: get close enough to document the creature, then get out alive. If we were lucky, the evidence would be enough to convince the authorities to take action. If we weren't lucky, well, at least someone would know what happened to us. We approached the Cherokee campsite from Dal, moving through thick stands of mountain laurel that would give us cover. The morning mist was still rising from the creek, making everything look ghostly and strange. 50 yards from the clearing, we stopped. Kelly set up her camera on a tripod while I watched the tree line through my rifle scope. The forest was dead quiet again. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves. There, Kelly whispered. I swung my scope toward where she was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the mist shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Big, dark, walking upright. It was circling the clearing, staying just out of sight. It knows we're here, I said. Kelly was filming, adjusting her camera angle to track the movement. How is that possible? Same way it knew to come after you last night. This thing is smart. Smarter than we gave it credit for. The creature completed its circle and stepped into the clearing. God help me, I'll never forget what it looked like. 10 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in dark brown hair that looked almost black in the morning light. Muscles like tree trunks, hands the size of dinner plates, and a face that was almost human but wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. Its eyes were amber-colored like I remembered, but they were intelligent eyes, ancient eyes. They looked right at our hiding spot like it could see through the trees and the brush and straight into our souls. Jesus Christ, Kelly whispered. The creature moved to the center of the clearing, to the old fire ring where we'd found the hunters' bodies. It knelt down and began arranging stones, building something, a new cairn, like the ones we'd seen covering the dead men. But this one was different. This one was meant for us. We need to go, I said. Now. But as we started to back away, the creature's head snapped up. It looked right at us, and let out a sound that was half roar, half human scream. Then it started moving in our direction. Run, I said. We crashed through the brush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear the creature coming, not running exactly, but moving fast through the forest, using paths we couldn't see. Kelly tripped over a fallen log and went down hard. I helped her up, but her ankle was twisted and she couldn't put weight on it. Leave me, she said. Get out of here. Like hell. I got her arm over my shoulder and we kept moving, but we were slow now. Too slow. I could hear the creature getting closer, branches breaking, that terrible breathing sound getting louder. We made it maybe another 100 yards before it cut us off. It stepped out from behind a massive oak tree and stood blocking our path. Up close, it was even bigger than I'd thought. The smell hit us like a physical force, musk and old sweat, and something else, something wild and dangerous. I raised my rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One huge hand swatted the gun aside like it was a toy. The other hand grabbed Kelly around the waist and lifted her off the ground. No! I fumbled for the rifle, but the creature was already moving, carrying Kelly toward a rocky outcrop 50 yards away. I got the gun back up and took aim, but they were too close together. If I missed, I'd hit Kelly. If the bullet went through the creature, it would hit Kelly anyway. The creature reached the rocks and set Kelly down. She tried to run, but her injured ankle gave out and she fell. The creature stood over her, raising both hands above its head. I had one shot, one chance. I aimed for center mass and pulled the trigger. The blessed silver bullet took the creature high in the chest, spinning it around. It roared in pain and anger, a sound that echoed off the mountains like thunder. But it didn't go down. It turned toward me, amber eyes blazing with fury, and charged. I worked the bolt and fired again. This one caught it in the shoulder, knocking it sideways, but not stopping it. I had 4 bullets left and maybe 10 seconds before it reached me. Third shot. This one to the leg. The creature stumbled, but kept coming. Fourth shot. Another chest hit. It slowed down, but didn't stop. Fifth shot. I aimed for the head, but hit the neck instead. Blood sprayed from the wound, black as tar in the dim light. The creature was 5 yards away when I fired my last bullet. This one hit it right between the eyes. The creature stopped like it had run into an invisible wall. It stood there swaying for a moment, those amber eyes going dim. Then it toppled backward like a falling tree and hit the ground hard enough to shake the earth. I ran to Kelly. She was conscious but shaken, blood running from scratches on her arms and face. "Is it dead?" she asked. I looked at the creature. 6 bullet holes, blood pooling under its body, no sign of breathing. "Yeah, it's dead." But even as I said it, I could see the wounds starting to close. The blood flow was slowing. The massive chest was beginning to rise and fall again. "Oh shit," I said. "We need to get out of here, right now." I got Kelly on her feet and we started moving toward the trail as fast as we could manage. Behind us, I could hear the creature stirring, that terrible breathing sound getting stronger. We made it to the Jeep just as the sun was coming up over the mountains. As I started the engine, I looked back toward the forest. The creature was standing at the tree line, watching us go. Even from that distance, I could see those amber eyes, and I could see something else. Intelligence, patience, and a promise that this wasn't over. "What now?" Kelly asked. "Now we get you to a hospital, and then we figure out what the hell we're going to tell Bob." They transferred me to a desk job in Richmond 3 weeks later. Administrative duties, they called it. The official repo. Art said Kelly and I had been attacked by a rogue bear, which we wounded but didn't kill. The missing maintenance workers were found dead 2 days after our encounter, their bodies arranged, in the same ceremonial pattern as the hunters. The Park Service closed that section of Shenandoah for the rest of hunting season, citing dangerous wildlife activity. By the time they reopened it the following spring, I was pushing papers in an office 50 miles away. Kelly quit the Park Service and moved back to Ohio. Last I heard, she was teaching elementary school and trying to forget what happened in those woods. I don't blame her. Some things are better forgotten. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't let it go. Every hunting season, I take vacation time and drive back to the mountains. I park at that same trailhead and hike up to the ridge overlooking Painter's Creek. I bring binoculars and a thermos of coffee, and I watch. The creature is still there. I've seen it maybe a dozen times over the years, always from a distance, always aware that I'm watching. It's kept to its territory mostly. There have been a few incidents, hunters who went missing, hikers who never came back, but nothing like what happened in '73. I think it learned something from our encounter, just like I did. I learned that there are things in these mountains older than our maps and our laws, things that follow rules we don't understand, that guard places we've forgotten how to respect. The Cherokee knew about them. They had agreements, boundaries, ways of living in peace with what couldn't be conquered or controlled. We forgot those agreements, but the Guardians didn't. I keep in touch with Dr. Novak. He sends me reports of similar incidents from other places, national forests in Montana, remote areas of Alaska, deep woods in the Pacific Northwest. Always the same pattern, always the same outcome when people push too far into places they don't belong. "They're not monsters," he told me once. "They're protectors. The question is whether we're wise enough to understand what they're protecting us from." I think about that sometimes, sitting on my porch in Richmond, listening to the traffic and the sirens and all the noise of modern life. Maybe the creature at Painter's Creek isn't just keeping people out. Maybe it's keeping something else in, something worse. These days, when people ask me about working in the Park Service, I tell them it was a good job, quiet, peaceful. Let them keep their illusions. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing and the shadows are long, I remember those amber eyes watching me through the trees. I remember the intelligence there, the patience, the promise. And I wonder if somewhere up in those mountains, something is still standing guard over secrets we're not ready to learn. The creature at Painter's Creek taught me that some boundaries exist for good reasons. Some places are meant to stay wild. Some things are meant to stay hidden. I just hope the next generation of rangers is smart enough to listen when those boundaries are marked. Because if they're not, if they push too hard and go too far, they might find out what happens when ancient agreements are finally, completely broken. And God help us all when that day comes. My name is Michael O'Malley, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years now. People call me Mick. Before this job, I walked a beat in Chicago for 8 years until my partner Danny got shot down in some gang crossfire. After that, I couldn't handle the city anymore. Too many sirens, too many people, too much noise. The mountains called to me like they call to a lot of broken cops. October 1985 was beautiful in Jefferson National Forest. The leaves had turned every shade of red and gold you could imagine. I was working the Devil's Backbone Ridge that month, a 50-mile stretch of Blue Ridge Mountains that cuts through Virginia like God took a knife to the world. Most of it sits above 4,000 feet, all knife-edge ridges and deep hollows that swallow sound. I'd been sober for 2 years by then, lost my wife Sarah and my boy Tommy when the drinking got bad. They moved back to her mother's place in Richmond. Tommy was 16 and barely talked to me anymore. The bottle had cost me everything except this job, and some days I wasn't sure it was worth keeping. The radio crackled as I drove my truck up the old logging road. Unit 7, this is dispatch. Unit 7 here, go ahead, Marie. Got a report of suspicious activity up on Backbone Ridge. Hunter called in saying he found some kind of camp with a bad smell. Could be poachers. I sighed and reached for my thermos of coffee. Copy that. I'm about 10 minutes out. Any backup available? Negative. Everyone else is dealing with that search and rescue down in Shenandoah. You're on your own until tomorrow. That should have been my first warning. In 13 years, I'd learned that being alone in the mountains when something felt wrong was never a good idea. But back then, I thought the worst thing I might find was a dead deer or some drunk hunters. The logging road wound up through thick oak and pine forest. My truck bounced over ruts and rocks as the elevation climbed. The trees grew closer together here, blocking out most of the afternoon sun. Even in October, it felt cold in the shadows. I found the hunter's truck parked at a pull-off near mile marker 37. A note stuck under my windshield wiper gave rough directions to the camp, about a mile north through the trees, near an old fire tower. The smell hit me before I saw anything else, sweet and rotten, like meat left in the sun too long. But worse than that. It made my stomach turn and my eyes water. In my Chicago days, I'd smelled plenty of dead bodies. But this was different, stronger, wrong somehow. I followed game trails through thick undergrowth, pushing aside branches heavy with dew. The forest felt too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even my footsteps seemed too loud on the fallen leaves. The camp sat in a small clearing near the base of an old fire tower. 7 large tents arranged in a perfect circle around a cold fire pit. Solar panels glinted on the tent tops, and I could see the edges of what looked like a marijuana growing operation. Tarps, irrigation lines, bags of fertilizer. But it was the bodies that made my blood run cold. 7 men arranged in the same circle as the tents, all facing inward toward the fire pit. They'd been dead for days, maybe a week. Their faces were gray and swollen. But what made me reach for my radio with shaking hands wasn't the smell or the sight of death. It was what had been done to them. Each man's chest had been opened with surgical precision. Their hearts were gone, cut out clean as a butcher's work. But around the clearing, the trees told a different story. Claw marks raked the bark 15 feet up oak trunks, marks too big for any bear, too deep for any animal I knew. The ground looked like it had been torn up by a bulldozer, great furrows of earth scattered with broken branches. I'd seen crime scenes before, Gang hits, drug deals gone bad, domestic violence calls that ended in blood. This was something else entirely. This was something that made the hair on my neck stand up, and every instinct I'd developed as a cop screamed that I needed to get out of there right now. But I was a ranger, and these were my mountains. Whatever had happened here, it was my job to figure it out. I called it in as soon as I got back to my truck, where the radio actually worked. Within 3 hours, the place was crawling with state police, DEA agents, and federal marshals. The marijuana operation was big enough to supply half of Virginia, which explained why everyone wanted a piece of the investigation. The DEA sent Agent Lisa Rodriguez, a tough woman about my age who specialized in rural drug crimes. She had black hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. We walked the crime scene together as the sun started setting behind the ridge. 7 operators for a grow this size makes sense, she said, taking photos of the arranged bodies. But what the hell did this to them? I pointed to the claw marks on the trees. State wildlife guy thinks maybe a bear got territorial, but I've never seen bear sign like this. Rodriguez knelt next to one of the bodies and studied the chest wound with a flashlight. This wasn't done by an animal. Look at the precision. Someone used surgical tools, maybe a bone saw. The hearts were removed post-mortem, probably as some kind of message. That made me feel a little better. Drug cartels sometimes sent messages with body mutilation. It was horrible, but at least it was human horrible. I could understand human monsters, even the worst ones. We finished processing the scene as darkness fell. The other agents headed back to town, but Rodriguez and I stayed at the ranger station to go over evidence. She had photos, measurements, interviews with the hunter who'd found the camp. There's something else, I told her around midnight. We'd been drinking coffee for hours, and my nerves were shot. Local family called the Hatchers lives up on the ridge. They've been mountain people for 6 generations. I stopped by their place yesterday to ask if they'd seen anything. And Old Man Hatcher just smiled and said the devil dog was protecting the territory. Said it happens every 10 or 15 years when outsiders try to set up operations where they don't belong. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. Devil dog? That's what he called it. Big, black thing that walks on 2 legs sometimes, 4 legs other times. Said his grandfather told him stories about Cherokee medicine man who got corrupted by dark magic, turned into something that wasn't man or animal anymore. You believe that? I shrugged. I believe the Hatchers have been living on that ridge since before the Civil War, and they know things about these mountains that aren't in any book, whether that includes monsters. I let the sentence hang. We decided to head back to the crime scene in the morning with a full forensic team. But that night, alone in my cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 7 men arranged in their circle, their empty chests gaping at the sky. Around 3 a.m., I heard howling. Not coyotes or wolves. Virginia doesn't have wolves anymore. This was something else, deep and mournful, but with an intelligence behind it that made my skin crawl. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the ridges and hollows until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped onto the porch. The howling continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound. In the morning, Rodriguez and I drove back up to the crime scene with 2 forensic technicians and a state police detective. The federal boys had already removed the bodies, but we wanted another look at the sight in daylight. What we found made my blood run cold. 3 more bodies. Not human this time. A black bear, a white-tailed deer, and what looked like a wild boar, all arranged in the same circle pattern as the men had been. Their hearts had been removed with the same surgical precision. But worse than that, the trees around the clearing now showed fresh claw marks, some of them 20 feet up massive oak trunks. The ground had been torn up even more. Great chunks of earth scattered around like something incredibly strong had been digging or fighting. This happened last night, Rodriguez said, studying the blood that still looked wet on the leaves. One of the forensic techs found something that made us all stop talking. Tracks in the soft earth near the tree line. At first glance, they looked like wolf prints, but bigger, much bigger. Then we noticed something that made no sense. Some of the tracks showed 5 toes instead of 4, like fingers, like hands. The tracks led north toward the deeper mountains, toward the old Cherokee lands that had never been properly surveyed or developed. Rodriguez wanted to follow them, but I convinced her to wait for backup. Something was hunting in these mountains, and whatever it was getting bolder. That night, I sat in my truck at the ranger station with my shotgun across my lap, waiting for the howling to start again. When it came, just after midnight, it sounded closer. Much closer. And for the first time in 13 years of walking these mountains, I was scared. The third day brought Joseph Crow Dog to my ranger station. He was a Cherokee elder from the reservation, maybe 70 years old, with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see through everything. I'd worked with him before on archaeological surveys and hunting permit issues. He was a good man, but when he walked into my office that morning, his face was grim. "You found the skinwalker's work," he said without preamble. Rodriguez looked up from her evidence files. "Skinwalker?" "Cherokee medicine man who went dark about 200 years ago," Joseph said, settling into a chair across from my desk. "His name was Sequoia Nightcrow, and he was my great-great-grandfather's brother. Story goes that he got jealous of other medicine men, started practicing blood magic to increase his power. The tribal council exiled him, but by then it was too late. The dark spirits had already changed him into something else." "Changed him how?" I asked. Joseph's weathered hands moved as he spoke, like he was shaping the story in the air. Part wolf, part man, part shadow. He could call up pack spirits to hunt with him, change his shape, move faster than any natural thing. But the worst part was the hunger. He had to feed on hearts, human hearts especially. The life force inside them kept him strong. Rodriguez leaned forward. "You're saying this thing has been killing people for 2 centuries? Every 10 or 15 years, somebody tries to establish territory on the ridge where he was exiled. Loggers, hunters, now drug dealers. He sees it as his land, and he protects it the only way he knows how." I thought about the Hatcher family and their casual mention of the devil dog. "The mountain families know about this?" Joseph nodded. "Some of the old families made deals with him generations ago. They leave offerings, stay clear of certain areas, and he leaves them alone. But outsiders..." He shook his head. That afternoon, we found Rodriguez's rental car on its side in a ditch 3 miles from the crime scene. The driver's side door had been ripped off its hinges, not cut or pried, but torn off like someone had grabbed it and twisted until the metal gave way. The roof showed claw marks that went completely through the steel. We found Rodriguez a quarter mile away, unconscious in a grove of pine trees. She was alive, but in shock, mumbling about amber eyes and something that moved too fast to see clearly. The paramedics took her to the hospital in Harrisonburg, but not before she grabbed my arm and whispered, "It's real, Mick. It's hunting us." That left me alone with Joseph Crow Dog and a growing sense that I was in over my head. We drove up to the Hatcher place as the sun was setting. The family compound sat on a ridge overlooking the valley. 3 cabins, a barn, and gardens that had been there since before the Civil War. Old Man Hatcher came out to meet us, shotgun in the crook of his arm. He was maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of lean build that comes from a lifetime of hard mountain living. His eyes were intelligent but wary. "Ranger O'Malley," he said with a nod. Then his gaze shifted to Joseph. "Cherokee." "We need to talk about the devil dog," I said. Hatcher's wife appeared in the doorway of the main cabin, a thin woman with suspicious eyes. 2 younger men, probably his sons, emerged from the barn. The whole family was armed. "Don't know what you mean," Hatcher said. Joseph spoke up. 7 drug dealers are dead. A federal agent was attacked. The skinwalker is hunting again, and this time he's not staying hidden. That affects everyone on this mountain." Hatcher's face changed. The casual friendliness disappeared, replaced by something harder. "My family's been on this ridge for 6 generations. We know how to live here without trouble. Maybe you government people should learn to do the same." "What kind of deal do you have with it?" I pressed. Hatcher spit into the dirt. "Same deal my grandfather had, and his grandfather before him. We mind our business, stay out of the sacred places, and leave the old offerings when the moon is dark. In return, our livestock don't get killed, our children don't disappear, and we don't have to worry about strangers setting up camps on our land." "You've been feeding it," Joseph said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Deer hearts mostly, sometimes bear. It keeps him satisfied, keeps him from ranging too far from the deep mountains." Hatcher's voice dropped. "But lately, it's different. Hungrier, angry. Trapped, so the drug dealers stirred something up, and now he won't be satisfied with animal hearts anymore." That night, I sat in my truck at the ranger station, radio in one hand and shotgun in the other. Joseph had gone back to the reservation to gather some kind of sacred materials he said we'd need. The plan was to perform a Cherokee banishing ceremony at dawn, but first we had to survive the night. The howling started at 10 p.m. Not one voice this time, 3 or 4, calling back and forth across the ridges like they were coordinating. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. I'd heard wolves howl before, during my training years out west, but this was something else entirely. This was intelligence, communication, strategy. Around midnight, something hit the side of my truck hard enough to rock it on its springs. I grabbed my flashlight and played it across the trees, but saw nothing except shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The radio crackled. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. You copy?" "I copy, Marie. What's your status?" "We've got reports of livestock killings all up and down the ridge. The Petersons lost 6 head of cattle. The Williamses lost their horses. All the hearts were missing. Sheriff's Department is requesting backup." I keyed the radio. "How many units do we have available?" "That's the problem, Mick. 3 of our boys went up to investigate the Peterson place around 9 p.m. We haven't heard from them since." My blood went cold. "Send everyone you've got to my location. And Marie, call Joseph Crowdog at the reservation. Tell him we can't wait until dawn." The howling was getting closer. Joseph Crowdog arrived at 2 a.m. with a canvas bag full of items I couldn't identify. Herbs, carved bone pieces, small clay pots, and what looked like very old weapons. He'd brought his nephew Tommy, a young man about 25, with the kind of serious eyes that suggested he'd seen things most people wouldn't believe. "We have to get to the original site," Joseph said, as soon as he stepped out of his pickup truck. "The place where Sequoia Nightcrow was exiled. It's the only place the banishing ceremony will work." "Where is it?" "About 5 miles north of here, up near the highest point of the ridge. There's an old Cherokee ceremonial ground that was used for vision quests and spirit communication. It's where he was practicing the blood magic when the tribal council caught him." We loaded into my ranger truck, me driving, Joseph in the passenger seat, and Tommy in the back with the ceremonial materials. The logging roads this far up the mountain were barely more than deer trails, and I had to use 4-wheel drive to make it over fallen trees and rocky outcrops. The howling followed us the entire way, not behind us, but parallel, like something was pacing us through the trees. Sometimes on our left, sometimes on our right, always just out of sight but close enough that I could feel it watching. My headlights caught glimpses of movement in the forest, shadows that were the wrong shape, eyes that reflected light from too high up in the trees. "There," Joseph said, pointing to a break in the tree line ahead. "The ceremonial ground is just beyond those rocks." I parked the truck at the edge of a natural clearing about 50 yards across. Ancient stone formations marked the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. In the center of the clearing sat a circle of worn stones that might have been a fire pit thousands of years ago. The silence was complete. No insects, no wind, no night sounds at all. Even our footsteps seemed muffled as we walked toward the stone circle. "This is it," Joseph said quietly. "This is where it happened." Tommy started unpacking the ceremonial materials while Joseph began drawing symbols in the dirt with a pointed stick. I kept watch with my shotgun, scanning the tree line for movement. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Sunrise," Eve replied. "The ceremony has to be completed as the sun comes up or it won't work. We need to build a sacred fire and keep it burning until dawn." That's when I saw the eyes. Amber-colored, intelligent, and too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. They watched us from the darkness beyond the tree line, unblinking and patient. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shape behind them. Something massive and wrong, like a wolf the size of a small horse, but standing upright like a man. "Joseph," I whispered. He looked up from his symbols and followed my gaze. When he saw the creature, he nodded grimly and continued his work. "Sequoia Night Crow," he called out. "I am Joseph Crow, Dog of the Eastern Cherokee. I have come to send you to the spirit world where you belong." The creature stepped into the clearing. It was 8 feet tall and covered in black fur that seemed to absorb light. Its limbs were too long, its fingers too much like human hands tipped with claws that could rip through steel. But it was the face that made my knees weak. Part wolf, part human, with amber eyes full of ancient intelligence and terrible hunger. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, like the howling but shaped into words. "Cherokee," it said, "you have no power here anymore. This is my territory now." Joseph struck a match and lit the kindling in the stone circle. Sacred fire blazed up, casting dancing shadows across the clearing. The creature hissed and stepped back, but didn't retreat to the tree line. "Your time ended 2 centuries ago," Joseph said firmly. "You were exiled for corruption, and now you will be banished to the shadow realm where you can do no more harm." The skinwalker laughed, a sound that made my ears ring. "Look around you, old man. See how many hearts have fed me. See how strong I have become." That's when I realized we weren't alone. More shapes emerged from the forest. Translucent wolves the size of bears, moving like smoke but casting solid shadows. Pack spirits, Joseph had called them. The skinwalker's supernatural, hunting companions. "Tommy, keep the fire burning," Joseph ordered. "Mick, we need to hold them off until sunrise." The pack attacked all at once. I emptied my shotgun into the first spirit wolf that came at me, watching my slugs pass through it without effect. But when it hit me, the claws felt real enough, tearing through my jacket and opening bloody furrows across my chest. Tommy swung some kind of blessed war club, and wherever it touched the spirit wolves, they dissolved into mist. But there were too many of them, and the skinwalker itself was advancing toward the sacred fire. Joseph chanted in Cherokee, throwing handfuls of herbs into the flames. The fire blazed higher and brighter, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. The ceremony was taking everything he had. The skinwalker reached the edge of the stone circle and stretched out one clawed hand toward the fire. Where its claw passed, the flames guttered and dimmed. "Dawn, Joseph!" I shouted. "How much longer?" 20 minutes, he gasped. We didn't have 20 minutes. The pack spirits were regrouping for another attack, and the skinwalker was slowly extinguishing our sacred fire. In 20 minutes, we'd all be dead. That's when I remembered something from my Chicago days. Sometimes the only way to stop a killer is to become willing to die in the attempt. I pulled out my service pistol and loaded it with the silver bullets Joseph had given me, then started walking toward the skinwalker. "Sequoia Night Crow," I called out. "You want a heart? Come and take mine." The skinwalker turned away from the fire to face me, and I got my first close look at what 200 years of corruption had done to a human soul. Its face shifted constantly between man and wolf, never settling on either form. The amber eyes held intelligence, but it was the intelligence of a predator that had learned to enjoy suffering. "Why, our heart will taste sweet, lawman," it said in that voice that came from everywhere. "Sweet with fear and guilt and old pain." It was right about the guilt and pain. I'd been carrying both for years. Guilt over Danny's death, pain from losing Sarah and Tommy, the weight of every mistake I'd made as a cop and a husband and a father. But looking at this thing that had been human once, I realized something important. My mistakes were human mistakes. This creature had chosen to become something else entirely. "Maybe," I said, raising my pistol, "but you'll have to kill me to get it." The skinwalker lunged at me with impossible speed. I got off 3 shots before its claws raked across my gun arm, sending the pistol flying. But the silver bullets had found their mark. Black blood sprayed from wounds in its chest and shoulder, and for the first time, the creature showed pain. It backhanded me across the clearing. I hit one of the ancient stone markers hard enough to crack ribs, but I was still breathing, still moving. The silver bullets weren't enough to kill it, but they could hurt it. Joseph's chanting reached a crescendo as the eastern horizon began to show the first hint of dawn. The sacred fire blazed higher than ever, and the pack spirits started to waver like smoke and wind. The skinwalker saw what was happening and abandoned its attack on me. It bounded toward Joseph and Tommy at the fire circle, moving on all fours now, pure predator focused on stopping the ceremony. Tommy tried to intercept it with his war club, but the creature was too fast, too strong. One swipe of its claws sent the young Cherokee man flying. He hit the ground and didn't get up. Joseph never stopped chanting, even as the skinwalker's claws reached for his throat. The herbs in the fire were creating thick, sweet-smelling smoke that seemed to burn the creature's skin wherever it touched. I found my pistol and put the last 3 silver bullets into the skinwalker's back. It screamed, a sound no human throat could make, and spun toward me. But the wounds were slowing it down, and dawn light was starting to filter through the trees. "Now, Joseph," I shouted. The Cherokee elder threw the last of his sacred materials into the fire and spoke a final word in his native language. The flames exploded upward 20 feet high, and the skinwalker was caught in the light. For a moment I saw Sequoia Nightcrow as he must have been 2 centuries ago, a man, just a man, with human eyes full of regret and terrible loneliness. Then the light consumed him, and he was gone. The pack spirits dissolved like morning mist. The oppressive silence lifted, and I could hear birds singing for the first time in days. The ancient ceremonial ground felt clean again, sacred in the way it was meant to be. Tommy was alive but unconscious, with a concussion and several broken ribs. Joseph was exhausted but unhurt. We got him to the hospital in Harrisonburg, where the doctors said he'd make a full recovery. Agent Rodriguez returned to duty a week later. The official report listed the 7 drug dealers as victims of a turf war with a rival cartel. 3 missing sheriff's deputies were found dead in a ravine, apparently killed in a car accident while pursuing suspects. The livestock killings were attributed to a rogue black bear that was never found. I never told anyone the real story except Sarah when I called her after everything was over. She listened without interrupting, then said she was proud of me for the first time in years. Tommy, my son, not Joseph's nephew, started calling me again. We're taking it slow, but it's a beginning. I'm still a ranger on the Devil's Backbone Ridge. The mountains are quiet now, peaceful in a way they haven't been for decades. The Hatcher family nods when they see me, a sign of respect that wasn't there before. Joseph Crow Dog visits sometimes, and we sit on my porch and watch the sunset over the valley. But I keep silver bullets in my service weapon, and I pay attention when the old-timers tell stories about things that move through the deep woods. Because I learned something important up on that ridge. There are more things in these mountains than we understand, and some of them have been here a lot longer than we have. The skinwalker is gone, banished to whatever realm holds corrupted spirits. But the mountains remember everything, and sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the wind carries strange sounds down from the high places, I remember that being a guardian of these wild lands means being ready for anything that might come out of the darkness. Even if that something used to be human,